All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when these slides find you. We're picking this back up. This will be our fourth video for ecology, who to kill, or who's going to die, to provide me or an organism in nature energy. All right, as always, let's start with these three problems that give us purpose. So for this chapter, we want to study and explore what would happen if a species goes extinct in nature. We want to think about how our bodies are using or losing energy. And we also want to think about how energy is flowing within an ecosystem or a biome, how energy is passed from one organism to another, and really what that means about how the ecosystem is set up, how many predators there are, how many prey, how many of what we'll call consumers. Today we're going to learn some new vocab to describe these organisms and how much energy they get in nature. And then finally, we want to start thinking about, if we haven't already, if being a vegetarian might reduce global starvation. So as we move forward, hopefully we'll begin to learn more information where we feel more comfortable trying to answer these questions. But really just remember, these are our three goals, learning more about these three mysteries or scientific problems. All right, next up we have slide 19. In your notebook, please write slide 19, and let's see what we have here. So to copy down for slide 19, it says the remaining 10% of energy from the food we get. So that of the food we eat, we get 10% of that energy possible, if you think about it in terms of the food chain. So just really quickly, if you're reading this, you're thinking, well, why am I only getting 10%? Well, let's go back to the food chain as a reminder. So back on slide 13, we studied and saw that every step from when the sun gives energy to the plants or the producers, all the way up this line to the top consumers, and we are kind of top consumers. So by the time we receive some energy from what we're eating, we're really only getting 10% of that transferred. So based on that idea, based on the fact that energy is lost every step, so every time one organism eats another, they are only receiving 10% of that possible energy. Based on that idea, we move forward with slide 19. So again, at slide 19, copy down and write in your notebook slide 19. And it says, with that 10% that you receive, even though you only get 10% of that energy transferred to you, it still goes to good use. We still stay alive. We still get enough energy to do these things. We can build our muscle cells up. If you're young, you may still be building extra muscle. Or if you're older, you're not building extra muscle cells. You're probably just making those muscle cells a little larger or repairing them, because as we work out, we damage them and they just need to be repaired. So the food we eat, that 10% of that energy can be used to repair those muscle cells. Or if you're young enough, you might still be growing, so that 10% can be used to help you grow into a larger person. And if you eat enough, you can, and if you don't need to grow, if you're not using it to work out, that unused energy can also be stored as fat. And that's for later use, as you can see. So we have some overweight people here. And if they don't need that energy, it gets stored as fat for later use. So let's look at that. Let's take a quick moment to look at some muscle cells and see what they look like. Let's see how many muscles we have that are using this energy. And then let's also look at what the cells are doing. If you have a little extra energy left over, how are those cells storing it? Okay, so let's take a little journey. Stay with me. So assuming you aren't exercising and using up every little bit of energy, you'll always have a little bit of glucose in your bloodstream. And these little golden circles, these balls here, are glucose. Now, let's assume this is your artery. So your heart's pumping blood through your body, and the artery is allowing the blood to transport these glucose to whatever cells your body may need. Well, if you're not exercising enough and your body isn't in a big demand to use that energy quickly, it'll take these extra glucose, the carbohydrates from what you ate, and it's going to store them in these special cells right here. These are fat cells. And fat cells' job is to store it for later use. It's a way to prevent starvation. Let's watch it happen. By the way, this documentary is pretty good, what I've seen so far. This is from a documentary called Fathead, and the YouTube video is called Why You Got Fat. So let's give them credit for all their hard work. But you can see it goes into the fat cells. These are other cells of the body, and when the other cells of the body are ready to use some of that energy, they ask for it, and the fat cells will release it. So we eat our food, the glucose goes in, and then the fat cells store any extra unused energy. Sometimes we have cells that don't really want to release it. And so that depends on if people are more overweight or less, because sometimes your fat cells want to store it all the time. They really want to make sure you never starve to death, so they keep that stored energy. But if the body really needs it, they'll release, just like they release this glucose, and it could go to your muscle cells or your brain cells or any cells of your body. All right, let's check out the muscle cells that love to use all this energy. Let's just see what they look like. All right, so what we're going to do is use the wonderful graphics of the Crash Course team to look at some muscle cells real quick. They do a fantastic job, and let's just use it to help us understand a little better. You can see all the cells of our body, and particularly our muscle cells. We have over 600 muscles in our body, and they're going to work. Every cell of your body needs that energy. So when those fat cells, release it, it goes to power a lot of our muscle cells so they can do the work, like riding a bike, right? But the question is what do they look like? So I want to do a quick show of just what they look like, each muscle cell. They're pretty interesting, and then we'll move on and talk about some more slides, okay? So let's see if we can learn a little bit more about muscle cells. All right, so we have 600 muscle groups in our body. That's pretty impressive, and humans anyways, right? And all the muscle cells contain these crazy, interesting structures called myofibrils, and muscle cells are packed with them. So we take a bunch of these myofibrils, and they go into a single muscle cell. So one muscle cell is kind of long like a rope, and it's full of these strands, these, I guess we could use chemistry lingo, but just think of them as large polymers or very long structured molecules. They're very complex, right? And the muscle cell is just full of them. The muscle cell is also full of mitochondria and other important things to use all that energy, right? So of that 10% energy we get from the food we eat, these muscle cells really put it to work. And then you have the single muscle cell, and then they're grouped together even more. So you take those, we can see nuclei right here. So the cells have their nucleus, and then they get bundled together. So you take a bunch of different muscle cells and group them together, and it just keeps happening more and more until you have a muscle like your bicep, right? So let's check out a bicep. Let's pretend this is a bicep and just see how it moves. Muscles are very simple in what they do. But watch this. You see how it's just contracting? That's all they do. They keep it simple. But that motion requires the energy, right? So that energy is getting used to either be stored for later, or that 10% of the energy in the food chain that we get from something we eat could be used to help the muscles do work, grow, or just make those little strands inside our muscle cells make more of them. All right, let's look at this example really quickly about how many calories we eat versus how many we need. It says if I used 1,000 calories today to walk, to study, and take care of my baby, so I basically used up 1,000 calories of energy. That day, I ate 1,500 calories. This means I ate 500 calories more than I actually used that day. And what I ate was In-N-Out. I had some fries, strawberry milkshake, and then later I got greedy and I had some Mexican street food called elotes, and it's very yummy if you've never had it. But it's corn with some cheese and some butter and a little bit of spicy, a little bit delicious, okay? So I had all this, and it all totaled about 1,500 calories. So again, I ate 500 more than I needed. If I do that, that means I have 500 calories of unused energy. And that 500 calories will either be lost as feces, stored as fat on my body, lost as body heat, or used to develop the muscle, okay? Later, though. Remember, if we go back to slide 15, it says we can lose a lot of our energy due to uneaten portions, body heat, or feces. And then, of course, in our food chain, if we haven't practiced it yet, we will soon. We'll do this worksheet, and we practice thinking about ways our body loses energy. Normally, humans don't mind if you lose energy, because normally humans don't want to store that extra energy as fat. So if we lose that energy as body heat, we're happy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have slide 19 here. Slide 19 introduces some new vocabulary to describe the animals in a food chain. We call plants producers or autotrophs because plants automatically feed themselves. Troph means food, auto means self, so plants feed themselves. This is going to be our high school level vocabulary word. The word I'd like us to use when describing plants is autotroph. So for slide 20, make sure that you write down the new definition for plants. We call them producers, or more specifically, autotrophs. And then we have organisms that eat plants or organisms that eat other animals. We call them consumers. Another word for that is heterotrophs. So in your notes, please write these definitions down here as well. And heterotrophs we'll use more often to describe animals in nature or ourselves. They eat other things for food. Hetero meaning other, trophs meaning food again. So it means they eat other things for food. All right, and that's how we all get our energies. Plants produce or automatically feed themselves with sun energy. Remember, we have our food chain, right? The sun feeding the plant. And then we have other organisms eating each other, like these later sections of a food chain, right? The thing is, we need to remember is that energy is lost each step of a food chain. So every time an organism eats another organism, energy is lost. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that soon. All right, let's move on to slide 21. Slide 21 shows you kind of the same information, but it introduces two more vocab, okay? What I'd like you to do is maybe take half of a page, so find a half page in your notebook and write slide 21, and then let's set this up in the form of this picture where we have the boxes and the arrows leading. So we're taking these complicated images and we're going to simplify it like scientists do, and we're going to take one box, make it bigger than the other two, and this box we're going to call producers or autotrophs. And we're going to draw an arrow to show that energy is being transferred to this slightly smaller box called, and it's going to be primary consumers. This word right here is very important. We're going to use this word a lot. Primary consumers are the organisms like this grasshopper that eats plants. So things that eat plants we call primary consumers. So you would copy this box down and whatever's in it. You would copy this box down and whatever's in it. But you would show this box above this one, just like you see in the picture, with the arrow connecting it. And then we would show another arrow leading up to this final box. And what I need to do is make this box look a little smaller. I think I've done that. That looks better. All right. And you can see it kind of makes the pyramid shape. And the second word I really want us to learn is that any carnivores, any organisms like this bird that eats another animal, or humans eating our hamburgers, right? So if we're eating these burgers, we're eating other animals, right? So we would call ourselves, on slide 21, we refer to ourselves as secondary consumers. So we're a specific type of heterotroph called a secondary consumer. All right. So in your notebook, we would see this pyramid with arrows showing energy transfer to each level, okay? All right, this is the last slide we'll do for this video. This is slide 22. And I want you to try to identify each organism as one of the following. I want you to try to identify the autotrophs, and we call them producers. An example, so what you do in your notebook is you would write A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. You'd create a list with these letters, and then we would call each letter whatever you think this organism is. So for example, in your notebook, you should write A equals, and it's a plant, it's a flower, so we call it a producer or an autotroph. And then B, looks like a turtle. I know a little more since I'm a bio nerd. This is a tortoise, and a tortoise eats plants. So it would be a primary consumer because it primarily eats plants only. So in our notebook, we'd write A equals autotrophs or producer. B equals primary consumer. We got this shark here. We know sharks are top predators. So we're going to call this shark a tertiary consumer or a top predator, right? Lastly, and the last one I'll describe is a little kitten. A kitten does not eat plants. It only eats other animals, but is not the top of the food chain, right? This kitten could be eaten by other predators. So we'll call it a secondary consumer because it consumes other organisms. Please finish the rest of these, and then we'll talk about it in class. Have a good day.